Hello, everybody. This is Dan. I'm down in my dark little basement here on Sunday morning, ready to talk to you about my literature review. I just sent it in to Bill Belden, who is hopefully going to peer review a little bit of it for me. Although I've apologized to him because I feel like it's still quite a bit of a mess. Actually, I've been working on it for the last 2 days straight, which is why I'm disheveled and sitting down here in my basement, ready to cry. But seriously, yeah. So I finished the this draft of the literature review, and I very much think it's a rough draft. Um, so what I take away from this is that there's still a lot of work to do on it. I could easily make this paper another 10 to 20 pages long, very easily. There's still a lot of issues to address. And one of the challenges that came to the forefront as I went through this process is that I'm dealing with two themes that are not very well defined in some cases. So, as you know, I'm doing my dissertation on crisis leadership and crisis management. And so there's the aspect of leadership, which I cover in the literature review. And although it's a fairly, it's about a century old area of study, of inquiry academically, it suffers from a proliferation of constructs, or construct proliferation as it's called, because there's a lot of different theories about what leadership is and what it entails and how you define it. And so that makes it very difficult because there's not a real unified definition, there's not a unified theory around it. You have a bunch of these different theories that exist throughout different disciplines that they haven't really been pulled together yet. Excuse me. And the same is true of crisis management, which is a younger area of inquiry, beginning really in the 70s and 80s. And once again, that too is dispersed across multiple disciplines and doesn't have any unified theory or even definition to lay the groundwork. So a lot of my paper is kind of going through a lot of different definitions for what leadership is, for what crisis management is, and so that's definitely something that emerged through this process. That's going to be a challenge for me to address going forward in the dissertation, because I will have to develop a working definition for both of those things as I move forward into my research. So, to describe the dissertation, the first half is dealing with leadership, and it deals with starts off with well, really deals with. I kind of go chronologically. So it begins with trait-based leadership, which begins with Galton in the late 1800s, kind of a eugenics-based theory around leadership, where you're born with certain leadership traits. Galton even proposed coming up with a breeding effort to breed great leaders. And so there's that, and that gets kind of discredited in the 1940s, and we move into a behaviorist mode of thinking in terms of what makes leaders, and that's focused mostly on behaviors. And of course, that leads straight into the transformational, transactional paradigm of the 1970s. James McGregor Burns introduces that in his book Leadership, and then Bass and Avolio pick that up and do a lot of quantitative studies and qualitative studies analyzing aspects of transformational and transactional leadership, and a whole body of literature revolves around that. I also want to talk about other concepts of leadership that are more contemporary, like pervasive leadership and more collaborative leadership, and a flattening out of leadership in a ways, with learning organizations and so forth. But I didn't have time. That's a section I left out, my literature review, that I'm going to go back and plug in, because I think it might even play a role in crisis management too, how the organization's set up and what kind of leadership structure they have and leadership culture that's pervasive within their institution. Then on top of that, after that, I go into crisis management. I look at the different definitions of that, because there's a plethora of definitions. The causes of, or types of crises, and it seems like almost anything at this point can lead to a crisis, from a human error, a personnel issue, terrorism, violence on campus, to weather, to a hijacking, to even an executive kidnapping. That was from some research in the 1980s. They were very worried about executive kidnappings, which I guess happened back then, right? So there's actually a play about it, an Italian play. So maybe that was happening in Italy. Executives were being kidnapped by the mafioso. Anyways, so that what constitutes a crisis? What types of crises are there? And then going through the stages of a crisis, a management process from signal detection, those early indications of when you first perceive, oh, something might be amiss here, something might be about to happen, and then boom, you've got a hot spot, you've got a crisis on your hands, and how are you going to deal with that? So there's that aspect, and then within the crisis management, you have two different areas at different parts of the crisis management process. The preparation aspect, which should happen before the crisis. You should be planning for the crisis with crisis management teams, with plans, and so forth. A lot of people don't do that, and that leads to some problems because if you don't prepare, you're not going to react as efficiently as efficiently as those organizations that do prepare. And there's a lot of research that shows that organizations that do prepare for a crisis not only are able to react more efficiently and contain the situation, resolve it more quickly, but they are also able to strategically use that to position themselves into a better place than they were before the crisis. So those organizations that don't do that end up, really damaging themselves. So preparation is really important, although, the literature does show and speak to the idea that no matter how much preparation you do, you can never completely prevent a crisis. There's always a chance of it happening because there's a confluence of variables that happen to come together in a surprising way that you weren't expecting, and boom, you have a crisis on your hands. And the other part of that puzzle is the learning process, which would come at the end of the crisis management phase, where you take the time to reflect and learn on the crisis that just occurred, how it was managed, and take part in organizational learning so that your organization can respond to the next crisis in a meaningful way. And that's through a process called no-fault learning. And you definitely don't want to be finger pointing at the end of the day and saying, oh, it's your fault or that person's fault or that constituent's fault, because that's just unhealthy. And it doesn't lead to positive learning. So if you just go in with a no-fault learning mentality and create opportunities for learning from the crisis, then the organization can take that feedback and incorporate it into their plan and react more efficiently the next time a crisis happens, because it's not an if, it's a when the crisis is going to happen and what form it's going to take. So all that's covered, and then I talk a little bit about community colleges or higher education institutions and their particular challenges with crisis issues, such as the layout of the campus. They're open access campuses. They're hard to shut down and keep people off of. So how do you manage a crisis in those kind of environments? Plus, we have very unique cultures compared to private entities with shared governance and decision-making processes. And how do you address those issues in a crisis situation? So there's a lot of unique factors within higher education that need to be addressed too. And I don't fully cover those in my literature review, but I definitely plan on reviewing those over the Christmas, inputting some of those over the Christmas break. Speaking of which, I hope everyone does have a good Christmas break or holiday break. I'm definitely going to be working on my literature review and my chapter 1 to try to get those in shape for when we go into winter quarter for our methods class, so that I have a more solid literature review than what I'm probably going to submit tonight. And that my chapter 1's revised to conform to that new literature review because I've changed my topic, and so that I'm really prepared for our methods class come winter quarter. So I look forward to hearing everyone else's presentations on where you're at in your process, and have a great holiday break, everybody. Take care.